Good morning.
Good morning. Hereby, I open this academic ceremony in which Ngoc Pham will defend the academic thesis, Essays on Technical Change and Efficiency in the Transition Economy, the Case of Vietnam. May I invite you to present the summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Thank you very much. I would like to, dear prorector, dear member of the Corona, friends and audience, in the next 15 minutes, I will shortly present my thesis. So let I share my screen and start my presentation. Can you all see my presentation?
Yes, very visible.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for participate today for my defense. I would like to summarize my thesis on technical change and efficiency in the transition economy, the case of Vietnam. So the thesis is consists of 5 main chapters. The chapter 2 on the historical perspective of Vietnamese economy from the 1980 to the mid-2000. In the next chapter, we examined the ownership transformation and giving the optical choice of the privatization in Vietnam. Chapter 4 examines the relationship between innovation and export of Vietnam SME sectors. And whereas the next chapter answers the question that is there any evidence for the technological spillover effect of FDI in Vietnam. The last chapter deals with the impact of the process innovation in rye cultivation in Vietnam, as Vietnam economy used to be and still be agrarian economy. So let I start with the first essay or chapter on the historical perspective of Vietnamese economy from the reunification of Vietnam in 1976 until the mid-2000s. So in this chapter, we try to examine the institutional evolution of Vietnamese economic history, and we divide the economic history of Vietnam in 6 main phases. The first phase is we call Socialist Transformation from the reunification of Vietnam in 1976. It lasts for 5 years before Vietnam came to the bottom-up reform from 1980 to 1985. And you can see on the right-hand side is a figure showing the economic performance in terms of the GDP growth and GDP in the constant value. So the third phase of Vietnamese economic history is economic renovation, which is very important for Vietnam. It marks the time when Vietnamese economy switched from the socialist economy, the center plan economy, to the market-oriented one in 1986. And from 1990 to 1996, it is a more open economy time. And when we got the economic slowdown in 1996 to 2000, and as integration to the world economy is inevitable, so the last phase marked the integration of Vietnamese economy into the world economy. So what is the finding of this chapter? The chapter showed that the economic history of Vietnam from 1986 up to 2000 is a bottom-up reform process in which many policies were carried out and forced by economic condition, and then the others dominated by ideological view. So one of the ideological view is we want to emphasize here is the Hanoi Consensus. Is it mean like the dominating role of the state sector as a fundamental characteristic of the socialist-oriented market economy. And this kind of ideological view still holds today. And also we find out that as the other economy, driving force of economic growth in Vietnam is domestic market, liberalization, trade opening, foreign direct investment from overseas, and privatizations. And the next chapter as a collection of essays on technical change and efficiency of this reform in Vietnam. So let us start with the chapter on the optimal choice and prospects of Vietnam ownership transformation. So in this chapter, we try to understand the privatization progress in Vietnam. And we found that Vietnamese government chose the step-by-step or gradualist approach for conducting privatizations, and in which only limited number of state-owned enterprise in the non-key sector was privatized. And as a consequence, the privatization progress was very slow and accompanied by SOE reform programs. So we call it like ownership transformation because this is a privatization and ownership restructuring together. And as I say in the previous chapter that the Hanoi consensus on the dominating role of the state sector still hold today. So this Hanoi consensus been reflected through the privatization progress, which is actually happened in Vietnam. And in this chapter also, we try to understand that whereas in the case of the other country, that SOE reform will boost the performance of SOE in Vietnam or not. And there is many indication, but I just show you in the figure on the left is the structure of investment. Then you can see that the investment, reallocation of investment, allocation of investment to state sector was always above 40%, and some year is reached 60%. But the performance of the state sector in terms of contribution to industrial output is declining and to only 20% in the recent year. So it showed that the performance of SOE could not provide any evidence that supports to the assumption that the SOE reform lead to the higher profit or efficiency. So this is lead to the research question that is there in any country that any kind of privatization of suggestion for better performance of the SOE. Then we build up what we call like the model, a linear model, which is trying to capture the privatization in Vietnam. So the question is that if the labor and capital could reallocate again across sector and across type of ownership. In here, we define five types of ownership. The first is a state enterprise in the local, state enterprise in the center, private firm, 100% of foreign owner firm, and the joint venture. So it is a five types of ownership being examined in the model. So if the labor and capital could reallocate across sector and type of ownership, what would be the optimal allocation? And then how the activity of the feasible domestic final demand? And then also we try to decompose labor and capital, labor in different type of skill level. So we try to understand that whether the different skill level will be needed in the optimal level. So we define 4 different skill levels: the technician, the high skill, low skill, and unskilled people. So in the model, we try to to define optimum is attain of expanding vector F. F is domestic final demand, up to the vector FC, which is C here is expansion vector. So C is an indicator of the efficiency of the economy. So if C equal to 1 at observed level, so the economy is, if C equal to 1, the economy is already is optimum. If C equal to 1.1 example, so the economy is potential is 10% more than actual performance. So running the optimization, we also using the Leontief welfare function because we are using input-output table for this model. So input-output table will be split into different types of ownership. So VT and U here is a make metric and use metric. And then, with the constraint for different level of the skill, 4 constraint reflects the 4 different kind of skill. The first constraint for technician people. The second constraint is for the skilled people. So, and you can see here, technician people could do the job of technician, and also the redundant of technician people, if possible, can do the job of the skilled people. And then the third constraint for low skill, and the last constraint for unskilled. So the model, when we examine the economy in the optimal, we find some main finding that here the privatization in the model we call mass privatization is totally opposed to the gradual approach that Vietnamese government chose and implemented for the time being. We call mass privatization because labor and capital can choose any sector within industry in terms of type of ownership or between industry. And it could be implemented in the very short term in the year that we are running the optimization. So we found that the mass privatization should be implemented in Vietnam because it contributes to higher welfare improvement compared to the observed level. And that as the optimum, the more value added, obviously, is created. But is it not associated with more job creation? So we witness job loss in optimal level. And mass privatization will accelerate the creation of high-skilled jobs and technicians, but lead to low-skilled job loss. So it shows that the economy should be restructured toward the high skill and medium skill sector. And then, the policy implication would be the current skill situation of Vietnam labor force, which is focused on the cheap labor and low skill, could be a bottleneck for Vietnam economic growth in the near future if we want to achieve more economic growth than is it before. So the next chapter examines the very fundamental question that is there any relationship between the innovation and export of Vietnam SME sector? So in this chapter, we try to model export behavior of Vietnamese SME as a function of innovation, and also X represent for the firm characteristic. Innovation that we are using firm level data in 2005 could be classified in 3 different kinds of innovation: the product innovation, process innovation, and modification. Since we examine export behavior, so export would be equal to 1 if the firm doing export, and export equal to 0 is a firm not export, and also innovation. And because there is the kind of, is it a high possibility that the endogeneity between export and innovation. So we choose instrument variable model for examining export. And here innovation is equal to just Y. Just is variable which is not present, not appear in the export function, and endogeneity would be would be solved because we use the IV approach. And then our strategy is to use a fitted value of innovation obtained by the equation 2 in the instrument equation, and innovation measured in the equation in the equation 2 is could be used in the export function. So the first step of the IV profit regression could be presented in in the appendix table A1 if you want to see in detail. The finding of this chapter is that innovation are very important determinants of exporting for Vietnamese small and medium enterprise. And in an SME-dominated economy like Vietnam, boosting firm competitiveness by fostering innovation will cause export growth. The next chapter will try to find out the evidence for the relationship between FDI and technological spillover effect. So in this chapter, we try to model the output, the firm output is equal to the production function. So it's including the capital stock, labor, and material. And also we including horizontal backward and forward linkage to examine the spillover effect. The horizontal backward and forward linkage, and also for the other data is taken from the firm panel data from 2000 to 2005. And also in order to calculate the horizontal backward and forward linkage, we also using input-output table of the 2000. So in this chapter, we find out the very important things, which is also consistent with the other study on Vietnam spillover effect of FDI, is that the spillover to backward linkage are important for productivity improvement for domestic manufacturing firm supplying for foreign firm in Vietnam. The last chapter, as Vietnam is agrarian economy, before 1986, the majority of activity of Vietnam economics activity is agriculture. Then we try to understand that whether what we call it the large-scale field model is a process innovation in rice cultivation. So we try to examine that whether the large-scale field model, if it could be applied, could bring to the improvement of household welfare and also improve the inequality in Vietnam or not. So let I a little bit spend about 1 minute to describe what is the cultivation of the rice in Vietnam. So the upper figure shows the previous the value chain of rice export in Vietnam. You can see here between the farmer and the exporter, there is involvement of collector, miller, and polishing factory. So Vietnam is one of the largest rice exporter in the world, and then it's expectation that the more that we can export, the better for the farmer. But the current, the current value chain harms the farmer to get benefit from exporting rice, because the benefit of rice exporting is distributed among the farmers, the exporter, also the collector, miller, and polishing factory. So the core of innovation here, described in the second figure below, is that to set up the large-scale field with the participation of only farmer and exporter. And then once the linkage between farmer and exporter been established, the various actors, example like collector, miller, and polishing factory, could be, like superfluous and then not appear in the value chain anymore. So is it upgrading in the value chain or process innovation in terms of rice production in Vietnam? So the government, the government realized this kind of, large-scale field model, and then allow for land consolidation program, which is allow for swapping a very small field belong to the farmer, and then to form up the large-scale field without any change in the title of the land. So here, hence, a large-scale field model could be set up, and the benefit of a yes.
Oh yes. Yeah. Please, can you kind of round up?
Yeah, I'm going to finish. The process of innovation in rice cultivation will bring that the farm gate price increase, so that the farmer will benefit from selling, with a higher price than it was before. And also the efficiency would be reduction of production cost, in improving productivity, and in the long term, because the quality of rice been improved, the exporter will negotiate with the higher export price for the world market. And then we try modeling it by modeling the price chain, whereas the change in the price of price would lead to the change in the price of other, products, other products in the economy. And then we try to estimate the labor income effect is a change in wage in response to the price change. And then finally, we calculate the welfare is the impact of change in price on the net income from production and wage. So we found that adoption of large-scale fuel model have significant impact on household welfare. And then the combined effect of large-scale fuel model will not only improve the household welfare, but also foster Vietnam rice export. So the export quota, which is applied in Vietnam, should be relaxed in order to enhance the application of this large-scale fuel model. This is a process innovation in rice cultivation in Vietnam. So I already briefly present my thesis in the very short time. Thank you very much for your attention. And I give a floor for the back to the pro-rector for the question and answer section. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Your enthusiasm and commitment took 5 more minutes, so we will also take 5 more minutes to make sure that we won't reduce the time for discussing your valuable work. So the opposition will be opened by Professor Dr. Neil Foster McGregor, who is Professor and Deputy Director at UniMerit, and who is a Professor in Globalization and Innovation at this university, and he also was the chair of the assessment committee. The floor goes to Professor McGregor.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, dear Ngoc, firstly, let me congratulate you on your thesis. I mean, in many ways, it's a very focused thesis, concentrating on the performance of Vietnam prior to and after the Doi Moi reforms of the mid-80s. And at the same time, I think it covers a lot of ground. It considers issues of ownership, exporting, FDI, and value chain upgrading, all in the context of technological change that sort of underlies the whole thesis. And overall, I think the different chapters fit together quite nicely. I think you've done a good job in creating a nice coherent thesis. Turning to my question, however, I have a question on chapter 5, where you look at the presence of FDI spillovers within Vietnam, further examining whether there are differences in the extent of such spillovers between manufacturing and services firms. And the approach you adopt is now fairly standard and follows the earlier work of Javorcik and others in the early 2000s, and looks to estimate both horizontal but also vertical, so forward and backward linkages using input-output tables. And you reach some nice results. So the first one is a fairly standard result now, that spillovers tend to be largely backward, so it's sort of multinationals benefiting their suppliers, so to speak. But you also find this interesting result that FDI spillovers through forward and backward linkages in the case of services firms tend to be negative, while they tend to be positive for horizontal spillovers in the case of services, which you argue is due to some kind of demonstration effects. And I think what I miss, and this is the first part of my question, what I miss a little bit in the chapter is some understanding of what the sort of theoretical motivation is for examining differences in spillovers between manufacturing and service. So very simply, why may we expect differences in the extent of spillovers between manufacturing and services firms? That's the sort of first part of my question. And one reason I ask that is because when I think of services, I think one thing that distinguishes services from manufacturing is that often it's necessary to be in close contact with the consumer. So my expectation would have been that the forward and backward linkages would be actually more important than horizontal linkages in the case of services. You find the opposite. So the second part of my question would be, do you have an explanation for these negative effects of forward and backward linkages?
Okay, can I answer the question?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, the reason is that I think Vietnam is a country where, open for investment. So the FDI come to Vietnam for the manufacturing sector, but also for services sector, which is, like in term example, like in terms of tourists, is quite a lot because Vietnam have a long beach. So this is a reason why we try to and also with the availability of data. So we try to investigate the spillover effect, not only in manufacturing sector, but also on service sector. But you know, like, due to the limitation of the data that we do not have input-output table for every year, which is like ideally it need to be calculated the backward and forward linkage for every different year of the panel data. But we use the 2000 for calculation of the backward and forward linkage and also horizontal linkage. So the first question is, you mentioned about what is the difference between manufacturing and service when I'm trying to investigate. So we see that manufacturing in Vietnam benefited from the Vietnam comparative advantage in terms of the labor, low labor costs and some incentive by the government. So it's like as a country, then our finding the same as a study on Vietnam and also on the other country in the world. But the service is quite interesting that we find different results, and we could not be able to compare with the other existing before on service sector in Vietnam. So what we try to understand that maybe due to Vietnamese FDI in service sector have some kind of, you know, like a kind of, you know, high capital incentive in terms of investment on infrastructure, on, you know, example like hotel and tourists. So the result of service sector, which is like normally is operated by the 100% on the FDI with a little, you know, like backward and forward linkage. So the backward and forward linkage of the service FDI in Vietnam with other supplier in Vietnam is little. So normally is provided by, you know, like labor force rather than some other, you know, like sectors. Then the result would be, you know, like we found the result is quite a mix and not very statistical significant. And some result for the horizontal linkage is negative. It shows that market stealing effect, because the foreigner come to Vietnam, establish the service industry, and because the high quality standard of the service provided by foreign owner firm, and then Vietnamese service company are losing the market to the foreign company. And well, I think in the future we need to elaborate more, because we have more longer panel data and more data on the input-output table, and then we can do another kind of study, which is try to highlight some you know, question that we could not be able to answer in this study.
Okay, let's well, hopefully Professor Foster McGregor will agree that I move on to the next member of the degree committee, given the time available. So I give the floor to Professor Rand, who is a professor of development economics at the University of Copenhagen, and who was also a member of the assessment committee. The floor goes to Professor Rand.
Thank you very much, and dear candidate, first of all, congratulations with a very thorough thesis. As you know, I have worked quite a lot on Vietnam as well, and sometimes, as you also mentioned now, that some of the analysis that has been carried out is in the thesis, it reflects that it's somehow dated data, and we also know that the data is available to upgrade some of the analysis in the chapters. But I will focus a little bit on a question in chapter 2, where you try to explain, or you explain the history of the Vietnamese economy from 86 to the mid-2000s in a historical perspective. And I was a little bit surprised because there is a lot of literature on this in political science. Martin Rama, who worked at the World Bank in Vietnam, in Hanoi, and Ford and Gainsborough also did something in the early millennia. And then we also have all the work by Malesky, trying to also do analysis of the historical perspective in a comparative perspective with China and other Asian countries. And what is clear from that discussion in that literature is the importance of what they call the fence-breaking initiatives in Vietnam's initial reform processes. So, and it's not really mentioned in this chapter 2. So all the experimentation that happened in the production processes with introducing new products, a lot of innovation, but also closure of innovations, and the role of the state in generating these innovative initiatives. It's not discussed, and I would like to ask the question, why has this not been discussed more thoroughly, given that it's very much linked to the remaining chapters of your thesis?
Thank you very much, Professor Rand, for a very interesting question. First, it's a little bit historical perspective and when doing this chapter, because the chapter was due quite a long time ago in 2005. So at that time, we are thinking about trying to understand Vietnamese economy from the reunification of Vietnam in 1975. 1975 until the 2000, and then I try to update with more data on the 2003, 2005. I understand very well about the historical perspective, which is a French term that like having initial condition for Vietnam economic transformation from the market oriented to the time before for the time being, but like at the time when we try to look at the data on French time, and then also because apart from just institution analyze, the second part of the chapter, which is using the input-output model to quantify some indication, which is like how the open of the economy and how the multiplier effect, which is like defining by investment, export, and domestic consumption could play a role of a driving force economic growth in Vietnam. So at that time we've been twisted between two like attempts. The one is try to go in very deep on institutional evolution, and the other we try to match it with input-output analysis. And that's why like if we balancing this, we could not be able to find out the data on French time to match with the data in the contemporary, input-output table. So is it one of the one of the witnesses of the chapter? Then I think I highly appreciate your comment, and then we might be, because I'm very much love this chapter, and then in the future maybe we will take the opportunity to improve this chapter, toward your comment. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. The opposition will be continued by Professor Dr. Klaus Zimmermann, who is the professor of economics at Bonn University and who was also a member of the assessment committee. The floor goes to Professor Zimmermann.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Also, I would like to congratulate the candidate. Yes, so dear candidate, I was reading your work with pleasure. In particular, I read chapter 4 for this event here. I would like to have a question there. This has to do with because I was feeling at home when I was reading the chapter, because very early back in my earlier life, I was doing similar kind of regressions for developed countries using business survey data. So I'm close to the topic. So I like also your look at export activity. However, and this is the first more general part of my question, is well, in a period where Vietnam moves to the world market and integrates in the world market, and at the same time, we know that innovations are very much driven by expected demand in the future, which will be positive. So the more relevant question could have been, in my view, to look at the reverse causality we are looking at, so to speak. Yes, to what extent are innovations in Vietnam exploding or moving up by export orientation? Now, if it comes to your analysis, you do a very standard and acceptable empirical strategy, but there are difficulties. And I want you to a little bit reflect a little bit on it. So the first part of that is that you have a cross-section. And at the left-hand side of your regression is whether the company has been exporting, not only in that period, probably also in the period before, yes? Whereas at the right-hand side, you have variables like innovations, which are measured as well, new things in that period. So there is a little bit of a causality issue. So a side remark, a footnote also says could be, why haven't you, I know you have previous waves and it was difficult to get good data to make a comparison of changes, but would it have been possible to identify to what extent companies have been entering for the first time together with innovation the world market? Now, if it comes to your methodology, well, nowadays causality, every day we have a new critical remark on these kind of general studies. We cannot blame you for details. However, the crucial issue of causality analysis, if it comes to instruments, is that the exclusion restriction holds, yes? And well, this means that the instrument should be correlated, in your case, with innovations highly, but not correlated with export activity. But the variables you are using are very likely correlating. And well, so how I read your results, this is not entirely so convincing. This brings me to the end and say, well, if you may not have hard evidence at the moment, but maybe you know more about the issue. Can you explain us a little bit more about how exporting or the world market integration has really caused Vietnamese companies to be innovative in the sense not only to bring new products, but also maybe have own Vietnamese inventions behind these innovations? Okay, sorry, maybe too much, but also a chance for you to choose what you want to answer.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyway, I am highly appreciate your comment and your suggestion. I try to address your comment and question to some extent as far as I understand fully for your question. The first, you asked me about how can I measure the cost effects of the firm, but unfortunately, in this study we examine export behavior of the firm rather than the export behavior in terms of the real value. So we try to model export as a choosing of the firm to be exporter or not exporter. So export is 0 or 1, is depend on whether the firm become export or not. Of course, this raises an endogeneity problem because the more innovative firm is likely to be exporter, and the more firm involved in the world market, the requirement for improving the productive for the innovation. And then we go to the second question that you asked me about whether the instrument that we are using here is it good or not. We try to instrument it by using some variable, and we also have the test, a first stage of the instrument in the appendix table I1. In this table, we showed you that how good of the instrument is. And we find out that we were a little bit lucky when we got this kind of instrument. But in the future, you definitely right that we need to expand our study because the instrument and also the data is changing. And then you have one point. Yeah.
Just to intervene, the share of skilled workers, yes, certainly has an effect on innovations, but it's also must be a good predictor for exporting activity. So but it's not intuitive. I mean, so I know it's very difficult to find a good instrument, and I'm not blaming you too much for that.
Yes, I understand that intuitively, the share of skilled worker, on the one hand, contribute to the innovative activity of the firm, but in the other hand, also is contribute to productivity or exporting activity. I think you're absolutely right. But you know, when we are limited in the choice of instrument, and also we try to test the instrument as much as we can. And we appreciate that, you know, like your comment. The point also have some kind of supporting evidence in Vietnam that for quite a long time, Vietnamese SME was not considered innovation as a main activity of themselves. Because in Vietnam, we, you know, like small country, just move from center plan to, you know, open market. And then, you know, most of the firms in Vietnam are thinking about, you know, economy of scale rather than doing R&D and doing innovation. So the only those who involved in exporting, you know, under the pressing of the competition with the other firm in the world, and now realize that if they could be able to innovate, then they would be more comparative advantage for themselves. But even you can see here, innovation are more not only product innovation, but also process innovation and product modification. So it's require, it's kind of model of innovation in Vietnam a little bit different with developed country, where the certain amount of the sale, certain percentage share of the sale will go to R&D, whereas in Vietnam a little bit, you know, less than that. They are doing modification, trying to capture other people doing, and then you know, modify their product a little bit to meet the demand of the foreign market. And also we also under the pressing of the competition. So this is a very you know, first time in is a very early time in Vietnam economies, where the firm rely, because the data is covers a period of time from 2005, and then, you know, for a time being the data could be different. So I hope that with support improved data, we will find a better instrument for this.
Thank you very much. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Pham Quang, who was also a member of the assessment committee and who is an assistant professor, in particularly in innovation economics. And the floor goes to Dr. Quang.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, my best congratulations for your thesis, and I very much enjoyed reading your thesis. It has really opened my understanding and horizon on certain topics about the country. So it was for me an honor to read this. My question goes to chapter 3. So in there, one of your findings is that the privatization is decreasing the demand for low-skilled labor and increasing the demand for high-skilled labor. You also have mentioned that this finding is in contradiction to some of other studies. And as an explanation, you have mentioned that your analysis is an ex-ante analysis, whereas the other analyses are ex post. So this would lead to the differences in results. Would you please elaborate a bit more on the factors that is behind the ex ante and ex post analysis in this case that would lead to the different results that we see?
Thank you very much, Dr. Vuong. Thank you very much for giving me a comment, and particularly in the chapter 3. Yes, my chapter is kind of, we try to measure, to measure the expectation that if the mass privatization could be implemented, and how would be reallocation of labor and capital. And then we find out that the demand of the Vietnam economy are moving towards skilled and technician people. We mentioned that there is a mixed result between our study and the other study, and the difference of the finding between our study with the other study, if there is maybe on the fact that we are looking at, in the model, we are looking at the allocation efficiency. When the other study, they are using the firm level of data, they're looking at the technician efficiency. So they try to measure what actually happened with the performance of the firm. Otherwise, we are taking a general equilibrium to look at allocation performance of the whole economy as well. So maybe it's one of the reasons why our result is not fully, consistent with the other micro analysis. But also, I have to I also point out in my discussion of the result that in comparison with the other study using the same method, we also find out the same, conclusion about the demand of the economy on the high technical people. And also a recent report from Vietnamese economy by Asian Development Bank. Also, they find out that the demand for the technician people and the high-skilled people in Vietnam are rising, and then the current situation of Vietnam TVET system and labor force is not meet the future demand of that. So we do hope that our study would be served as one of the input for the policy of Vietnamese government to think about if Vietnamese economy want to move to the high value-added sectors, and then it's not only the policy but also the evolution of Vietnam economy. If we wanted to move it toward to get the faster economic growth, then the demand for technician people and the high-skilled people are needed. Unfortunately, when we are looking at the current TVET system of Vietnam, we could see that the demand of the labor market is not matched with the supply in terms of the technical and high-skilled people. Yes. Thank you. I hope that to some extent I satisfy your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Lily Wang, who is a senior researcher at the UniMerit and who is specialized in economics and innovation. The floor goes to Dr. Wang.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Dear candidates, let me also first congratulate you on finishing your great thesis, which I really read with great interest. I haven't worked on any papers for Vietnam firms, but I do have experience on similar topics related to Chinese firms. So I'm especially very much interested in chapter 5 when you mentioned the learning, backward forward learning and capacity building. Of course, for developing countries especially, we all agree this would be very important for less advanced countries to learn from foreign firms. And so I was just wondering how long and to what extent can local firms, for instance, in Vietnam or in other other developing countries or the Asian countries like in China, how long can they benefit from such FDI spillovers? I understand that the data you used in this thesis covers a period from 2000 to 2005. And we also understand that spillovers can help local capacity building. So over the past probably many years, 17 years or something, so if there are positive spillovers, local firms must have already learned a great deal by now. And in your thesis, you also mentioned that in order for the spillover effect to happen, there must be some technological gaps between foreign firms and the domestic firms. I understand that you focus on a certain period of time, namely 2000 till 2005. Nevertheless, I still want to invite you to provide some more reflections on the current status, current stage for knowledge learning, technological learning in Vietnam. So, do you think the gap has been filled by now? Or still, do you think there's a certain gap and not so big, not so small, in order for local firms to learn? So, what do you think?
Thank you very much, Dr. Wang, for a very interesting question. And then I know that you got a lot of experience in on studying the kind of similar topic in China. Yeah, Vietnam is a much more smaller country in terms of the size of economy to China's. And 2000 and 2005 is a very beginning of the period of Vietnam when Vietnam integrated fully to the world economy, because we until 2007 we just being a member of WTO, and then before that we was a member of the Asian Economic Community, and we got Vietnam US bilateral trade agreement in 2001. So the covering period of our panel data seem to be a very early stage of the integration of Vietnamese economy to the world economy. Of course, FDI came to Vietnam, and there is evidence for the learning. But as I show in our analysis, that apart from the apart from the spillover effect in terms of the backward linkage that Vietnamese firm who supply to the foreign firm could learn from that, we did not find much concrete evidence on the other linkage, like forward and horizontal linkage, and particularly in the service sector. And your question is also asked me about what do I think about how long it would be needed for Vietnam economy, or particularly for Vietnam small and medium enterprise to narrow the technological gap. Yeah, I think technological gap is very important initial condition if the firm want to learn from FDI. If the technological gap is quite big, and then is it even the FDI is there, they would not choose Vietnamese enterprise as a supporter, and also the competition would be market stealing effect rather than learning from demonstration. I think Vietnam, for a time being, the SME in Vietnam are much better in terms of the technology capability. Particularly with the industrial number 4, we are learning very much from digital economy, particularly in service sector. But the charter was conducted only for coverage the period of time from 2000 and 2005, but until now there is much updated and rich data, and some professor also recommended me to improve our analysis using a more updated data for a longer period of time, because the longer of the pattern data, the more concrete evidence that we can find for the spillover effect. And then we highly appreciate your comment, and then we do hope that maybe we will apply for the new pattern data and try to find out that whether there is evidence for the other spillover effect, and then evidence for learning from SME in Vietnam in the longer time in Vietnam. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Stefan Dietrich, who is an assistant professor in development economics in particular at UNU Merit at this university. The floor goes to Dr. Dietrich.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, also congratulations from my side on your work. I was particularly interested in chapter 6, where you analyze the welfare impacts of food price or food commodity price changes, a topic that is unfortunately very relevant these days. And what you do is that you simulate the effects of the large-scale field model to understand the welfare implications. And as we all know, simulations hinge on assumptions. So with my question, I would like to challenge two of the explicit and implicit assumptions that you're making. But I guess for the sake of time, I would just focus on one assumption.
Keep in mind, we've got 5 minutes extra because the candidate used it 5 minutes.
All right, then let's see how far we get. The first explicit assumption that you're making, and now I'm quoting here, is that in your model, you assume that rents previously captured by collectors, millers, and polishing factories would be transferred to farmers, so 100%.
Yeah.
And to me, this LSFM kind of resembled a contract farming scheme. And in my experience in the contract farming schemes, it's actually the company or exporter that dictates the conditions. And in that case, I would assume that they will not give all the rents to the farmers, but instead you could also assume that they will just marginally increase prices to create an incentive for farmers to participate, but keep all the benefits for themselves. And if you work with that assumption in your simulation framework, I think it would have quite substantial implications for your results, because then the welfare impacts would also be, for farmers, would also be just marginal. So I was wondering whether you can justify this assumption. And then as there's still some more time, I would also add a second assumption that I would like to ask you to defend. And that's an implicit assumption that you're making on the productivity changes by the LSFM. So you basically calculate or infer the possible changes in productivity by comparing small and larger farmers. And then you use this parameter to simulate the changes in productivity. And you basically assume, if I understand correctly, that this increase in productivity will be the same for all farmers. So regardless of whether a small or a large farmer participates in the program, it will always be the same constant relative increase in productivity.
Yes.
And I was wondering whether this could not just create the results, like the results could be an artifact of this assumption.
Okay.
So I would ask you to elaborate a little bit on these two assumptions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Stefan Dietrich. I'm very much appreciate your comment and challenging me with the two assumptions. And I would like to explain why we make assumption, and then whether the assumption hold in some particular condition, and then the first assumption about the transfer benefit from the collector, particularly collector, and the other participation, but as an actor in the own value chain value chain model to the large scale field model. And you said that the exporter could play the role of dictator, and then they will share the benefit with the farmer rather than like giving transfer the whole benefit to the farmer. Yes, I agree with you in general that the exporter could do that, but the assumption of our paper, apart from the real like observation at the field, in the south of Vietnam during this time. They have some historical perspective. Is that in the time when we did that paper, it is the very first years, the first 2 years of applying a large-scale field model in Vietnam. So maybe the exporter wanted to accelerate the application of this large-scale field model and attract more farmers to participate in this model. And then our data, which is collected from the field, show that in some particular region in Vietnam where the very piloting project will apply, the whole benefit would transfer to the farmer. And then we understand that in the future, maybe there would be, different rule of the game when the economic benefit of the model become large. And then they could sit down together and talk about the different rules of the game. And then I appreciate this assumption challenging. And then if we do again for the analysis, we will observe more data at the field level and to see whether they changing the rule of the game or not. The other question on why we assume that the productivity change is applied for all farmers is also from the fact that the large-scale field model is applied, saying like every farmer have about 1 to 2 hectares per field farmer. And then the large scale is about 2,000 hectares. So it consists of about more than 2,000 farmers involving in that model. And the farmer, after involved in the model, play as a farmer, but they are following strictly with with the guideline and technical assistance of the exporter. So the last few now the cultivation strictly follows the technical advising, and then with the control of the exporter. So everything do at the same time, like cultivation, providing water or fertilizer. So we do hope that the productivity would be quite consistent over the 2,000 of hectare, because the farmer now is just actor, activity, doing farming activity rather than deciding about the technical issue. So we found that we've been reported that by the exporter that the productivity are consistent for a whole field, because the farmer are not individually. They are followed strictly by the technical assistance by the company.
Okay, thank you. This concludes the first round, as we have still some extra 5 minutes. I'm happy to give the floor to Professor Foster McGregor again, who only had some shorter time period, so maybe he still has a short question or issue that he would like to address. Professor Foster McGregor.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Let me pick up on the questions that Professor Zimmermann was asking about Chapter 4 on exporting innovation. And I share some of his concerns about the instruments. But as a relatively short question, one thing that I miss in that discussion is that you talk about the thing that you're worried about, endogeneity, but you don't spend much time talking about where that endogeneity comes from. So is it due to omitted variables? Is it due to measurement error? My guess is that it's due to some kind of issue around learning by exporting and the fact that globalization can impact on innovation. But it would be good, I think, if you maybe spend a couple of minutes just reflecting on where this endogeneity comes from, and maybe linking it to the sort of broader literature looking at self-selection versus learning by export effects in the broader sort of exporter productivity literature.
Yes, thank you very much. I think theoretically, the endogeneity is come from learning by exporting, because the small NDB, and also for a condition of Vietnam in 2000, when we just first integrated in the world economy, there is no attempting to doing R&D for small and medium enterprise, because small and medium enterprise, like doing innovation is risky and uncertainty, and then they are not wanted to spend, the certain amount of sale to R&D. But you know, like when they are exporting, when they doing exporting, they realize that you know, like the requirement of the market that they export to, and also the competition, particularly with some country like China, force them to do, you know, innovation. And then at the very beginning, we found that the percentage of the firm who doing innovation are more or less like process innovation and product modification, rather than, you know, like product innovation. So and I think, you know, you come back to the question that whether the endogeneity is come from what, and I think the endogeneity is come from learning by export, because the more the firm export, the more they realize that they need to do innovation, and then they come back to do innovation in order to get more comparative advantage in the exporting market. And then again, when they do innovation, they export more. But you know, like with the limitation of data at that time, the learning period is take a little bit more time to get more clear, you know, evidence. And then we at that time, you know, like one of the comment from the committee, reading committee, that we could have a longer period of time on the pattern data to see whether the pattern of learning are changing. And then it might lead to the different result of our analysis. And I'm highly appreciate the comment from the committee, and also from the defense, from you, and from as a professor on this endogeneity issue.
You may briefly conclude your response. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I have very short conclusion that the thesis, some chapter of the thesis done a little bit more long times ago, and then the data to some extent is not up to date. But some findings still relevant today, and then we do hope that in the future, with more availability of the data, we will address the comment from the committee and also from professor. We'd highly appreciate, and then we could improve our analysis. Particularly, we plan to improve our chapter on FDI and spillover effect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ngoc Pham, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed, and the degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and the quality of your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return.
Yes, thank you very much. Xem này.
Ngoc Pham.
Yes.
The degree committee here present online has assessed the quality of your thesis and the quality of your defense. And in view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor.
Thank you.
Professor Monen is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with the Dutch university custom. And I invite Professor Monen to now take the floor. The floor is to Professor Monen.
Dear Ngoc, do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
I do.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present online, I hereby confirm upon you, Ngoc Pham, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, you will soon receive the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the supervisor, affixed with the official seal of the university, which the beadle is going to show you.
There is. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Di laudatio by Professor Monen.
Well, dear Ngoc, let me congratulate you. I'm really happy that you finally got this doctorate degree. And let me say a few words. Well, we know each other now for a long time. I looked back at my emails, and the first email, one of the first emails I saw was in March 2003, when you approached me, you asked me to supervise your thesis. So that's almost 20 years ago, but not yet. At that time, I remember we were still apart. I mean, you and Intec and Merit were two different units, and all we had in common was the joint PhD program. But otherwise, there was very little collaboration between the two institutes, and that has changed quite a bit nowadays. Keith Smith was also at that time part of the supervisory team, but then he left, and he left for Tasmania, and we haven't heard from him again. So I continued supervising you, and it was a little bit of a pity when you left in December 2005, because I would say at that time you had done about 80% of your thesis. Yes. So I was still hoping that, well, the last 20%, that's going to be a year or two. We met at a few times soon afterwards. We met at different conferences. I remember once in Brussels, one or two times in Beijing, in Japan, in Sendai, at the big Input-Output conference. And we kept in touch quite often for the following years. And then it became slower and slower. And maybe at the end, I talk to you once a year to wish you a Happy New Year and to ask you how the thesis was progressing. And you always told me that you were still interested in finishing your thesis. So I kept in touch with you. In the meantime, you have been done various things, consulting. I think you set up your own consulting firm. You have been teaching. Nowadays, you are lecturing. You have been working for various international institutions, the ILO, the Asian Development Bank, UNICEF. All this testifies to that you are a very dynamic person, optimistic, enthusiastic, but also what I always liked at you is that you were very respectful of everybody, always positive, always smiling, and with a deep conviction also in your religious and philosophical convictions. So I think this is going to serve you well in the future. And I think you will have, and I hope that you are going to contribute to the welfare of Vietnam. And I'm sure that you have something to offer to Vietnam. And I think I hope that with your PhD degree, you have a little bit of more impact on decision-making in Vietnam. And the last point, I also hope that you have got your PhD a little bit before your daughter. I don't know whether this is the case. So congratulations on you, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, Pierre, that the person who not only supervised me, but also encouraged me time by time, you know, during the time when I have a little enthusiastic for completing my PhD. But at the end, thank you very much for
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Also, yeah.
Dear Dr. Quang Pham, also on behalf of the Board of Deans, I congratulate you and your company and your supervisor, of course. And I would also like to thank the members of the degree committee for their contribution, because without them it wouldn't have been possible, but you deserve the degree of doctor. And I congratulate you with the honor that you have acquired. Maybe the members of the degree committee would like to congratulate you. I'll give them the floor for a brief period, and then I will declare the ceremony to be ended. Any of the members of the degree committee?
Yeah, maybe we go in order again. No? But, congratulations, Ngoc. It was a nice achievement, and as I mentioned earlier, a sort of very broad thesis covering a lot of ground and using a lot of different methods. So congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, congratulations, and I hope to see